The first batch of striped beans that we planted are just about ready to pick now, so I thought I'd do a video about, just fresh picking them and then bringing them right inside and going into the canning process of how we process them. Here they are all picked, and that there is a little cart that I picked up at Walmart the other day. They had just marked it down from $82 for $20, so I grabbed onto it, and we just love this little cart. Just so easy for my wife to use. Okay, so after picking the beans, the first thing that we do is we take them inside and then just snap the two ends of them off. Take that little tip off, and they just pop right off with your fingernail, and it's a pretty simple job. And then once you get them cleaned a little bit, just go through and give them a quick rinsing to make sure you get any dust or bugs or anything that might be, might have stuck on them when you picked them. And here they are all washed up. We got the beans all ready to go just about. But the only thing is, in order to can them, they say you have to break them into 2-inch pieces. So the next thing that I do, I just try to snap them all. Most of them I'll just snap in half, but they say to try to, use 2-inch pieces for canning. So that's what I do. It's kind of a time-consuming process, but I think it helps them to process faster. So here we are. I just about got all the beans broken down into shorter pieces, and then it's time to get out the pressure canner. Now we bought this 23 quart one because you can do 2 racks of the pint jars and process 18 pints at once. But basically it's just a big pot with a lid that seals on and locks on and holds pressure and builds up pressure for processing. Now it comes with some racks, and there also are some gauges that are little things that are weighted to control the pressure in it. You use different weights for different pressures. Now, to start out with, you put one of those trays in the bottom, and then you're supposed to add 3 quarts of water. So what I usually do is I'll just dump the first quart of water in the bottom, and then I'll add the 7 jars that fit in it. Now, the jars are all pre-washed, and we do a real careful inspection of each jar for any signs of chips, nicks, or cracks before putting them in the canner, because they will explode if there is any kind of a damage to them. So then what I do is I take the next 2 quarts of water that you put in there, and I kind of divide that between all the jars to keep them standing up and not floating around when you steam them in order to sterilize them. So you put in 3 quarts of water, and then they recommend to put in 2 tablespoons of a white vinegar and dump that down into the water in the bottom. And this actually helps keep the jars real shiny when they come out, keeps minerals and whatnot from building up on them. We take it out in our garage to process, and I use an old camp stove, about a 40-year-old camp stove hooked up to a 20-pounder. The camp stove is more controllable. You have to watch out with pressure canners. You cannot use them on top of these bigger camp cookers. You need a nice controllable flame to be able to control the heat in them. Then what I'll do is I have the jars in there in the water, and I'll just set the top on, and I'll bring it up to a boil and steam them for about 10 minutes to sterilize them. Then just remove the hot jars carefully, because there is a lot of steam, and it's a deep pot to dig down in there and pull out of. And I like to set them on a nice wooden cutting board so there's no cold surfaces that they're touching or any chance of them getting stressed out or cracking beforehand. So once you have the jars removed, now you have to be real careful with everything and keep it clean and sterile. But basically, we do the cold pack, and that means that you just take the beans that were cut up, and they're still cold. They haven't been cooked or anything, and we fill up each of the jars. So now this just, it just takes a little while to get the beans in there, and you got to do a little shaking and whatnot. You want to try to get them packed pretty much as tight in there as you can. So it's, the funnel helps a little bit. Sometimes I don't even use the funnel. I just hold them over the bowl and shove them in there, and take that little tool, that canning tool, and use that to push them down too, so I can get some more in there. And basically what you have to do is go through all your jars, which one load in this is 7 quarts at a time. So, and fill each jar up to within the 1-inch headspace that they recommend. Now, if you look at that little plastic thing, it's a gauge for headspace on the back side. Each one of those little notches is 1/4 of an inch. So for the 1-inch headspace, you do use the last notch to check it. Now you can add salt if you want, or you can leave it out. We find that we like the results better if you add a teaspoonful of salt to each quart, or a half teaspoon to each pint. Then we just take, and you have a pot of water boiling there, and you just take each jar and go back through and fill up the rest of the space in the jar with the boiling water. And I usually leave them a little bit lower than what they're finally going to be. And then I go back and I poke that little plastic canning helper down in the jars to get all the air out of them. And then what I'll do is I'll just set that on the edge of the jar and fill it back up to the 1-inch level when the water is touching the bottom of that, to set my headspace. And you have to be real careful with the headspace when pressure canning, so that you don't wind up with a lot of stuff cooking out, or just not enough water to process it. So once you have all there you can see what they look like. So once you have all the jars filled like that, what we do is we put the lids in a pot, and we bring them up just to below a boil for a couple of minutes, just to heat them up and sterilize them and soften the rubber seal. And then it's just a matter of setting them on top of the jar lid. And we find that there's this little blue plastic thing that you can buy to help you handle the hot lids. Is a big helper. It's got a magnet in it, so you can pick the lids out one at a time if they're not stuck together. Then just go back and apply the rings to it, and just kind of snug them up. You don't want them to be too very tight when you're pressure canning, so I just put them on snug. And then I remove the top from the pot and carefully place the jars into the pot. Now, I just want to warn you to make sure that you carefully place them and that you do not bang jars against one another or anything like that, because any defects in the jar can cause a problem when you're dealing with the kind of heats and pressure that you're dealing with the pressure canning. Now, once you get all the jars in the pot, this time you put the top on and you line up the little arrows on it and drop it on and twist it around so that it locks in position. And there's a little vent on it. You'll turn your heat up and just wait for that vent to start steaming. After it steams for about 10 minutes, like you see there, to get all the air out of it, you drop the weight on. And I'm using a weight that's set to be between 10 and 11 pounds of pressure. Now, after you drop the weight on, there's a little lock in the back. Oh, there it goes. You'll see pop up about a minute later. And now you're ready to start watching the gauge. Now, it'll go up real slow in the beginning, so keep an eye on it and adjust your flame as it goes up. And finally, when it hits about 10 pounds, that little weighted thing there will just start rocking to blow off the extra pressure. And there you can see it's a little over 10 pounds, 10.5 pounds, and it's starting to rock. So that's what keeps a pot from building up too much pressure. And there are different weights to use for the different pressures. Now you start your timer when that's rocking and you're at 11 pounds. Like I said, there are different weights for the different timers, and make sure or for the different pressures, make sure you use the right one. Now, as the timer counts down, when you hit the 0, you just turn the heat off on the pot and let it sit. Now, the first thing that'll happen is that little rocker will stop rocking. Then that little lock will drop down. And this usually takes about a half an hour to happen. Then I'll let it sit for another half an hour until it gets a little bit cooler. And I'll remove that the weighted top there. And then I'll just take the top off. And be very careful. Make sure you always spin it away from you, because there will be some steam escaping. Now, if you're not going to do another batch, you can just let this all sit in the pot, sit together, and cool down on its own if you want to. But I'm doing another batch, so what I'm doing is I'm carefully taking the jars out, and you'll see that they are still boiling, and they will keep on boiling. I've seen them boil for up to 45 minutes after coming out of the canner. They're just so superheated from the pressure that it takes a while for them to cool down. And as they cool, you'll see the boiling will stop, and then the next thing you'd hear is like a pop as they seal. And then here's the next batch I got ready. I only had 6 more in that batch. And then here's the final results after a couple hours of pressure canning. So as you can see, it's a pretty easy job. It just takes a lot of time, and you have to be careful. So the next thing I do is I let the jars cool down overnight usually, and then the next night I'll take them and I'll take the rings off. I'll give them a quick washing and then just label them and put them in a root cellar. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe.